You are not lazy. You are not broken. You are not unmotivated. You are overstimulated. And there is a profound difference between those two things. One is a character verdict. The other is a biological condition, and biological conditions can be reversed. Studies show that the average person now spends close to 3 hours every day on their smartphone alone. That is over 1,000 hours a year, 1,000 hours of attention, directed by an algorithm, rather than by you. In this video, the owl is going to show you exactly what dopamine is, what it is doing to your brain right now, and what actually happens when you begin to reset it. Not the surface version, not the trend version, the science they skip. Because once you understand the real mechanism, the path forward stops being about willpower and starts being about architecture. Let us begin with what dopamine actually is, because almost everything you have been told about it is incomplete. Dopamine is described everywhere as the pleasure chemical, and that description, while not entirely wrong, misses the most important part. Dopamine is not primarily about pleasure. Dopamine is about seeking. It is the motivation chemical, the anticipation chemical, the pursuit chemical. Dopamine does not fire when you get the thing you want. It fires when you are moving toward it. The craving, the chase, the anticipation of the reward. That is where dopamine lives. This is why you can spend an hour scrolling through content, find almost nothing that genuinely satisfies you, and still feel compelled to keep going. The dopamine is not in what you find, it is in the looking, and the looking never has to end. This is why the most addictive experiences in the modern world are not the ones that feel the best when you reach them. They are the ones that promise something just around the corner. The next video, the next notification, the next scroll, infinite anticipation, with no arrival. Now here is the mechanism that most dopamine content never explains. And it is the most important thing in this entire video. When dopamine rises fast and rises high, it does not simply return to baseline when the stimulation ends. It drops below it. This is not a metaphor. This is the measurable neurochemical reality. Every fast, intense dopamine peak is followed by a trough that falls below whatever your natural resting level was before. And that trough below baseline is not just the absence of pleasure. It is the generator of craving. The desire you feel for more is not coming from a place of wanting pleasure. It is coming from a place of wanting to escape pain. The pain of being below baseline, the restlessness, the flatness, the irritability that appears after the relief wears off. That is not weakness. That is the trough. And the trough is what keeps the loop running far more than the peak ever did, because the pleasure of the peak diminishes, but the discomfort of the trough reliably drives you back. Every time. There is something else. The higher the peak and the faster the rise, the deeper the trough that follows, which means that the more intense the stimulation, the more severe the below baseline state it creates, and the more urgently the brain seeks another hit, not for pleasure, but simply to feel normal again, and it compounds further. Each successive peak produces a lower high. Each successive trough drops further below the line. The system is not just adjusting to stimulation, it is progressively shifting away from pleasure and toward a state where the behavior is pursued almost entirely to escape discomfort. This is the trap in its full form, not just feeling good and wanting more, feeling worse and worse without it while feeling less and less with it. And the exit from that trap requires understanding that the trough is temporary and that the brain's baseline can and will recover if given the conditions to do so. Now here is a second mechanism that changes how you understand why long-term effort feels neurologically impossible. Not just difficult, neurologically impossible. When the dopamine system repeatedly receives fast, effortless rewards, very short gaps between desire and satisfaction, the system learns the gap. It calibrates to the speed. And when it is calibrated to a very short gap, everything that requires a long gap, education, fitness, meaningful work, creative projects, begins to register not just as difficult, but as wrong, as contrary to how the reward system expects the world to work. This is called contingency learning, and it explains something that willpower alone cannot explain. Why someone can genuinely want to pursue something meaningful, genuinely believe in it, genuinely begin it, and still find the pull back toward fast stimulation almost physically irresistible. It is not lack of character. It is a brain that has been taught to expect that reward follows quickly and easily. And when reward does not follow quickly and easily, when the gap is long and uncertain and uncomfortable, the system interprets that not as a normal feature of valuable things, but as a signal that something is wrong, a signal that you should stop and reach for what it already knows works. Fast. This is why the reset matters, because resetting the gap expectation is what makes long-term effort neurologically available again, not just motivationally possible, neurologically available. Now let us understand what a dopamine detox actually is, because the popular version misses the point entirely. A dopamine detox is not about eliminating dopamine. Dopamine is not the enemy, it is the mechanism. And it is not about suffering through boredom without a strategy, or sitting in an empty room hoping something resets. What a real reset addresses is this. When the dopamine system is chronically flooded by fast, effortless stimulation, the brain responds by reducing the number of receptors available. It is not punishing you. It is trying to maintain balance. But the result is that your sensitivity to ordinary reward decreases. Things that should feel satisfying do not. Things that should feel interesting do not. The world continues, but it lands differently, flatter. Now here is what the reset does. When stimulation is reduced and held at a lower level, the receptors begin returning. The research calls this upregulation. More receptors means less stimulation is required to experience the same quality of reward. The brain grows more sensitive again. And here is the most concrete way to understand what that means. If you have not eaten processed sugar for a sufficient period of time, a single piece of fruit can taste like something extraordinary. Not because the fruit changed, because your receptor sensitivity returned to the level it was always supposed to operate at. The ordinary world is not actually flat. Your brain was deafened to it, and the detox is the process of allowing the hearing to return. So what does this require in practice? 3 things. The first is removing or containing the primary stimulation sources. Not all of them. Not a dramatic renunciation of modern life, but the 2 or 3 sources that consume the most attention and deliver the least in return. For almost everyone in this era, they are the same. Short-form video that runs without active choice, random checking behavior with no clear purpose, late-night screen exposure that prevents the nervous system from completing the reset it needs each night. You do not need to eliminate them permanently. You need to make them intentional, scheduled, bounded, earned. Not the default state the brain wanders into every time a moment of silence opens. The second is learning to work with the urge rather than fighting it or immediately surrendering to it. When a craving arrives, do not negotiate with it. Do not reason with it. Do not try to think past it. Instead, do this. Bring your attention to where the urge lives in your body. Is it in your chest? In your hands? In the restlessness of your legs? Simply notice the physical sensation of the urge without acting on it. Describe it to yourself, even silently. Tight, warm, pulling left, moving upward. You are not suppressing it. You are surfing it. And the research is consistent on what happens when you observe an urge without acting on it. The urge does not escalate indefinitely. It peaks, and then it passes, without the reward it expected. And each time this happens, each time you surf the urge to completion without acting, the neural pathway that connects the trigger to the behavior weakens slightly. Not dramatically, but the weakening is real, and it accumulates. The third is rebuilding what the research calls clean dopamine. These are activities that produce a genuine dopamine response through effort, completion, and progress, rather than through passive consumption. Walking in natural environments, physical training, skill building, meaningful conversation without devices present, creating something with your hands or your mind, reading something that requires more of you than you want to give. These do not feel as immediately rewarding as a scroll. That gap is precisely the point. The gap between beginning and feeling the reward is where your tolerance for discomfort is rebuilt. And that tolerance is the foundation of every capacity you want to develop. Every goal, every skill, every relationship, every form of discipline you have wanted and struggled to build. All of it rests on the ability to remain in a gap long enough for the gap to produce something. There is a principle that makes all of this coherent. Effort before reward, not as punishment, not as deprivation, as the restoration of the sequence the brain was designed for. When effort precedes reward, when discomfort is tolerated rather than immediately escaped, when you complete something difficult before receiving something pleasurable, the prediction error the brain requires to feel genuine satisfaction is restored. The earned reward lands differently, deeper, more lasting, more motivating for the next attempt. And here is the part that most productivity content gets wrong. You are not banning pleasure. You are restoring the order of things. Progress first, reward second. That sequence, repeated consistently, begins to rebuild the internal hierarchy that overstimulation quietly dismantled. The morning hours matter most. The state of your nervous system in the first 60 to 90 minutes sets the condition for everything that follows. A morning that begins with immediate fast stimulation trains the brain that this level of input is the baseline. That reactivity is normal. That seeking is the primary mode. A morning that begins with quiet, movement, and a single clear intention trains it for something different. That depth is available. That focus is possible. That the day can be directed rather than reacted to. Not every morning will be perfect. Not every day will feel like progress. But the direction holds, and direction, held consistently over time, is how a life is rebuilt. Here is what the other side of a genuine reset feels like. Not the fantasy, the honest version. In the first few days, it gets harder before it gets easier. The system that was receiving constant stimulation now receives considerably less, and it signals for what is missing. Restlessness increases. Boredom arrives at a level that feels almost physical. The pull toward the old sources intensifies precisely because they are absent. Most people stop here. They interpret the discomfort as evidence the reset is not working. It is actually evidence that it is. The discomfort is the trough, and the trough is temporary. By the end of the first week, something shifts quietly. The restlessness begins to arrive in waves, rather than constantly. There are moments where the mind goes still in a way it has not in a long time, where a simple thing, a walk, a conversation, a meal eaten without a screen, lands with a quality it had stopped carrying. The dopamine receptors that were downregulated are beginning to return. The brain was not broken, it was deafened, and silence is not emptiness. Silence is the condition in which the quieter signals can finally be heard again. By the end of the first 3 to 4 weeks, the emotional reactivity begins to settle. Small friction stops reading as threat. The threshold for discomfort rises. Tasks that required enormous effort just to begin become more accessible. Not effortless. Accessible. And something happens that is difficult to anticipate until you experience it. You begin to notice what you actually want. Not the craving of the stimulation loop. Not the reaching that arrives the moment boredom opens. Something older, quieter, more specifically yours. The work that once felt meaningful before it felt too heavy to begin. The version of yourself you had access to before the constant seeking replaced it. Because the seeking loop of an overstimulated life does not just steal your attention. It replaces your direction with its own. Every algorithm feed is built to generate the next want. Not your want, its want. And when that signal is reduced to a manageable level, and the quiet returns, your own signal comes back. Less urgent than the algorithms, less engineered to capture you. But yours. You are not broken. You were miscalibrated. And calibration is something you can restore. One decision at a time, one morning at a time, one surfed urge at a time. The owl will see you there.